Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murdered three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Raimundo Rios Mayo Library in Arkansas. Good evening and welcome back to the show. Hope you all enjoyed last week's episode when we were talking about other things, other strange things. What's wrong? For some odd reason, my mic's not working.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murdered three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would
Can you hear this?
it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Raimundo Rios Mayo Library in Arkansas. Hello, welcome back to the show. Sorry about that. A couple seconds ago, my microphone decided to stop working. Alrighty, tonight we're going to be talking about one of the stranger characters in history, Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad III. He was known as Vlad Dracula as well. Why one man has so many nicknames is beyond me, but he earned most of them. Vlad the Impaler, Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, born 1431, died perhaps 1476 or 1477, and maybe he didn't die after all. He was three-time Voivode of Wallachia. Voivode is a form of a duke. He was also elevated to the title of prince at some time in his history. He ruled mainly from 1456 to 1462, only about 6 years. But during that 6-year period of time, he did a lot of history making. He ruled when the Ottoman Empire, also known as the Turks, were in the process of trying to invade all of Europe. In order to get into Europe, they had to come through the eastern portion, just north of Constantinople. Vlad III's father was known as Vlad II Dracula. He was a member of a order of knights called the Order of the Dragon. They were founded as a means of protecting Eastern Europe, Christians living that portion of the country, protect them from invaders from the south. Vlad III today is revered as a folk hero in Romania and Bulgaria for his protection of the Romanians and Bulgarians both north and south of the Danube. Following his raids on the Ottoman, a significant number of Bulgarians, common folk, and the remaining boyars resettled north of the Danube to Wallachia and recognized his leadership. A boyar was a member of the higher rank in the feudal system of Bulgaria, Muscovia, Russia, Wallachia, Moldavian aristocracies. In other, they were members of the royal family, but they weren't princes. They weren't direct descendants of the throne, but they did have a shot at it. A boyar was only a slightly lower than the ruling prince. Let's try all that again, only in English. Prince Vlad was the ruler of an area known today as Romania and parts of Hungary. His dad was Vlad II, who was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a.k.a. Dracula. Vlad III did such a good job keeping Turks out of Romania that thousands of people from all over Eastern Europe resettled to Romania. Vlad was born in Sighisoara, Transylvania, Kingdom of Hungary, today part of Romania. In the winter of 1431, to Vlad Dracula, who was soon to become the ruler of Wallachia. His mother is unknown. She was there. She was very much a person in his life, but unfortunately, at that time in the history, when a baby was born, you went down to the local church. They wrote your name down in a big book. They wrote your son's name down, and they wrote the name of the mother. Now, unless the mother did something memorable, such as slaughtering thousands of people or kicking off the Renaissance, people tended to forget who the mother was. And with all the violence and warfare going on in the area, lots of the churches would get burned down and their records would be lost to time. That's why his mother's unknown today. The same year that Vlad III was born, Vlad II traveled to Nuremberg, where he was indicted into the Order of the Dragon. That's where he received the title Dracula from Holy Roman Emperor Sigmundsson. Vlad III had an older brother, Mercia, and a younger brother, Radu III. Vlad also had a half-brother, also named Vlad, though his father's mistress, Kaltuna. She entered a monastery, and her son followed in her footsteps to become Vlad the monk. So now we have Vlad the Dragon, and Vlad the monk, and Vlad III. He wasn't going to get his famous nickname for some time, although he did carry the title of Dracula, which meant son of the dragon. Now, the title son of the dragon, you'd kind of expect it to be given to the firstborn son, but at this time it was handed to the secondborn. Vlad and Radu spent their early formative years in Sighisora, when their father took power for the first time. Vlad II Dracula brought his younger sons to Târgovoște, the capital of Wallachia, at that time. Now back then, the royal class didn't take their family around with them. If the father was off doing business, fighting battles, killing people, chopping off heads, he didn't want his family too close by because they could be used against him if the other side were to capture them. So it was not uncommon for the children, the wife, the relatives to be whisked away to some other castle somewhere, hopefully to be safe and secure while the dad was off wreaking havoc on the enemy. Sometimes the family seldom saw each other for years. At Târgoviște, the sons of the boyars and the ruling princes were well educated by the Romanians or Greek scholars. They were commissioned from Constantinople. Now, at that time, Constantinople was similar to the Vatican. There was a pope. So we had two popes at one time. There was the pope in Rome and a pope in Constantinople. Most people at that time could not read or write. The common man couldn't count either. So for a son of a prince or the son of a very wealthy man to have advanced knowledge, reading, writing, arithmetic, history, things like that, it gave them power over the commoners because they could understand things, they could reason things out, whereas the common man, he could walk and chew gum at the same time, and that was about it. Vlad is believed to have learned combat skills, geography, mathematics, science, languages. He learned German, Latin. He learned the classic arts, philosophy. He learned how to ride a horse. A lot of useful things at that time, since darn near everywhere you went by a horse. 1436, Vlad II ascended to the throne of Wallachia, but he got overthrown and run off in 1442 by rival factions in league with the Hungarians. Now, at that time, everybody was in a bad situation with just about everybody else. So people were constantly seizing the throne from each other, assassinating each other, doing various not too nice things. People think politics is bad today. They should have seen it back then. You didn't just say bad things about each other in the press. You just went and killed the other guy and then took his position of power. We're going to take a brief pause at this moment to have station identification and play a few commercials. So please don't go away. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Now, do you have your heart set on a great cup of coffee and just don't know where to go to find one? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. You'll be happy to know there's plenty of parking this time. Life is too short to drink nasty coffee, so head on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop. Check out some of the best coffee on the planet. Not into coffee? He also has tea, sweet drinks, some fruit, and a muffin or two. Stop on by and enjoy the day.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arkanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arkanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back. Now, Vlad II had just gotten thrown out of the castle by a group of opposing individuals, and he didn't much like not being in power. He was one of those kind of guys, got to be in charge of things. So, since he couldn't go to the Hungarian government and ask for help because they were the ones that had gotten him ousted in the first place, he decided to go the other direction. He went south to the Ottoman Empire, who at that time they weren't exactly at war with each other. They just didn't really like each other much. He went to the Ottoman Empire, and when he went, he traveled with his two sons, Vlad III and Radu. His older son stayed there in Romania. When he got to the Ottoman Empire, he asked the Sultan if the Sultan would be interested in helping him get his throne back, and the Sultan said, "Well, of course I'll help you. However, you're going to leave your two kids here as hostages so that if you go back on your bargain, you'll never see them alive again." Vlad Tepes, not really being a family man, thought, well, that's not too bad of an idea, and besides, I've always got the older son at home, and I don't know if that's what was going through his head at the time or not, but that was the decision that he made. So Vlad II left Vlad III Dracula and Radu with the Sultan of Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, and traveled back to Romania, where, along with the help of the Sultan, he managed to gain his throne back. Those that had seized power were dealt with in a bad way. So Vlad II was now back on the throne. However, two of his children were locked up in the south somewhere. They weren't being abused, they weren't being tortured, stretched on the rack, or anything like that. No, instead, his two sons were being educated by the Turks. They learned to speak Turkish, they learned to ride horses, they learned how to fight. The Turks unwittingly were teaching their soon-to-be rival all of their best tactics. The idea was they were hoping that the two boys would decide to convert to Islam and then join them. That's kind of the way they did things. They would convert people to their way of thinking, and then you became part of the family. Vlad was not at all happy about being in Turkey. He was considered a handful by his teachers. Even though they taught him well, he was rebellious. He was constantly getting in trouble with his instructors, his teachers. He was punished on many occasions for his thinking outside the box, shall we say. Now, his younger brother, he really liked it. In fact, Radu was so much into learning everything that they had to teach him, he developed the nickname Radu Salfrumas, or Radu the Handsome. You kind of wondered, was he really that good-looking, or was Vlad III really that bad to look at? But Radu was quite well liked by the Turks, and he eventually even converted to Islam and entered the Ottoman service. He became great friends with the Sultan's firstborn son, Mahmet. Vlad, on the other hand, well, he didn't like it. He didn't like being there, constantly in trouble, constantly getting taken out back and probably beat with a switch, or worse. He really grew to hate the Turks. It is rumored that Vlad may have picked up his idea of impaling, which we'll go into way too much detail on that later. But they think he picked up the idea of impaling from his not-too-pleasant hosts. The death of Vlad's father and older brother, Mircea, they were both assassinated, greatly influenced his development as a young man. His father was ousted as ruler of Wallachia by the local warlords, the Boyars, and he was killed in a swamp near the Beltini. I hope I am pronouncing these names correctly, but I do not speak Romanian. His older brother was blinded, tortured, and then buried alive. Very unpleasant way to go. So now, Vlad III, if he can manage it, is the direct line to the throne if he can figure out some way to get there. Vlad III escaped from the Turks, and he took refuge in Moldavia, small country near Romania. He was concerned that, what with having his father and older brother both assassinated, that he was probably next in line for death. So he went in search of his uncle, Prince Bogdan, and his cousin, Prince Stefan, hoping that, being family, maybe they would be a little less likely to kill him. He was in luck. They formed a very good friendship. They promised to be there if either of the three needed each other, kind of a three-way split. Things were going quite well for Vlad until 1451. 3 years later, Vlad III was forced to flee after the assassination of Prince Bogdan. There was a lot of assassinating going on back then. You didn't like the president, killed him. Didn't like the king, you killed him. Didn't like the ruling party, you killed all of them. Like I said, people think politics is dirty today. Nothing compared to back then. Prince Vlad III reappeared in Transylvania and came under the tutelage of the mighty Hungarian military leader Jonas Hunyadi and the Hungarian king Ladislaus. Now, the ruling king of Hungary and Romania and all these other countries in the vicinity was changing practically every year. And then the fact that some of these ruling families, they took the same name over and over, so it made trying to follow the timeline somewhat interesting. Everyone was named Vlad. Everyone was named something or other, and there were people coming and going from the throne as rapidly as can be imagined. Transylvania is an actual country. It's Latin for the land beyond the forest. It's not just a made-up name that Hollywood started using. There really was a Transylvania. It was in central Romania. surrounded by the arc of the Carpathian Mountains. Transylvania was about 34,100 square miles. It's just a little bit smaller than either Tennessee or Virginia. Legend holds that Vlad personally beheaded his opponent, Vladislav II, in one-to-one combat. He was quite a swordsman. Prince Vlad had done everything he could to get his throne back, since he felt that it did belong to him, and what with the backing of the King of Hungary, who was now on his side, and some of his family, he was able to go back to Romania and take the throne back. Once in power, Vlad is said to have rounded up all of the boyars, any that he thought were involved in the death of his father and his older brother, and a few that he just didn't care for. He got them all together inside a dining hall and then set the place on fire. That's what you get for killing his dad. Things were done different back then. In 1453, the city of Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire. Up until that time, the Turks had managed to stay on their side of the river, and Constantinople was the gatekeeper. During the Crusades, if you were going south to fight the Islam armies, you went through Constantinople. Same held for the Muslims going north. If they wanted to go north into Europe, they had to go through Constantinople as well. They didn't get quite as friendly a reception when they got there, though. Once Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire, Vlad was charged with leading a force to defend Wallachia from an invasion. His 1456 battle to protect his homeland was victorious. He was a well-trained military leader. And who had trained him? The Turks. So he knew all of their best tactics going into battle, so he kind of had one up on the enemy. 1453, Pope Pius II called for a new crusade against the Ottomans at the Congress of Mantua. The first crusades had taken place back in 1200s, when they had decided to go and seize Jerusalem from the Muslims. So Christian army after Christian army marched off into the south, fought horrible, bloody, nasty battles. Thousands of people were killed. If you'll remember from an earlier show, some of them got eaten. All of this in the name of God. So now the Pope is calling for another crusade. 1459. In this crusade, the main role was to be played by Matthias Corvinus, who is now the King of Hungary. Once again, the ruler of Hungary has changed hands. To this effect, Matthias received 40,000 gold coins from the Pope, money to pay an army, buy weapons, buy some of that modern technology that was starting to show up, things called cannon. Still, bow and arrow, sword, horse battles, that was the best way to win, because at that time a cannon was about as reliable as a cheap watch. Vlad III allied with Corvinus in the hope of keeping the Ottoman army out of Wallachia, which was claimed as part of the Ottoman Empire by Sultan Mehmed II. They had decided that Wallachia belonged to them, possibly because of Vlad II's agreeing with the Sultan to use the Turkish forces to get his throne back, and thus causing Wallachia to become part of the Ottoman Empire. Confusing. Later that same year, Mehmed II sent envoys to Vlad to urge him to pay a delayed tribute of 10,000 ducats and place 500 recruits into the Ottoman forces. A ducat was a gold or silver coin used for trade. Ducats had various metallic content, purchasing power throughout the period. Kind of like the dollar today. Sometimes it was worth a lot, and sometimes it wasn't worth very much. Also, Vlad was expected to put 500 soldiers into the Turkish army. Well, to begin with, Vlad didn't much like the Turks. He really didn't like this offer that they made, so he refused. In fact, he refused to pay the money. He refused to send the soldiers. He was not very happy with his Turkish envoy. Instead of paying the tribute, Vlad Tepes, Vlad III, I should say, at that time, had the envoys' turbans nailed to their heads. He claimed that this was because they refused to remove their hats in his presence. At that time, you walk into the king's throne, you would pull your hat off, bow to the king. Well, the Turks said, "We don't bow to this man," and he said, "Oh, yeah, I'll show you." Okay, that's not really what he said. But he had some men come in with a very large hammer and drive nails into the sides of these people's heads, which led to their dying, which I can understand. Talk about a headache. Okay, so now he has just killed the envoy from Turkey. This did not please the Sultan one bit. The Sultan received the report that Vlad had done what he had done to his envoys. So now he sent a second man, Hamza Bey, to try to negotiate peace with Vlad. They didn't want to fight him because they already had tried that and lost. So now they're trying the diplomatic route. Try to appease him, try to bribe him. If that doesn't work, then kill him. The Sultan sent his forces north towards the Danube. Now, Vlad III had spies throughout the Turkish Empire. He paid them well. He would receive intelligence from them. He knew that the Turks were on the way. Oh, Bey at that time was a Turkish title for chieftain. Vlad, knowing that they were coming, he set up an ambush. Hamza Bey brought with him 1,000 cavalry troops, untold numbers of foot soldiers. In order to get into Wallachia, they had to pass through a narrow passage in northern Georgia. This is where Vlad launched a surprise attack. The Wallachians surrounded and defeated the Turks. The Turkish cavalry had no way of maneuvering, what with all the trees and the rocks, and so they were kind of sitting ducks for the Wallachian archers. Those taken alive were impaled. And since Hamza Bey was the leader of the attacking force, they put him high up on the highest stake so he could look out over his men and still be in charge as he slowly died. Now about impaling. This is not the kind of thing you want to be involved in. You sure the heck don't want to be the recipient. You don't use a sharp stake. It's dull. It's rounded on the end. It can take up to 3 days to die once you've been seated. They take a greased pole, maybe about 3 inches across. They remove your trousers. They take this pole and they insert it into a place that you don't want inserted. And then they hoist it up into the air, and the weight of your body causes you to slowly slide down this pole as it passes through your internal organs. Well, I should say it passes by your internal organs. Weirdly enough, there was a scientist who actually tried this with a cadaver. They impaled the cadaver on a wooden pole, and then they sat there and they watched how long it took for the cadaver to slide to the bottom. Once he was at the bottom, they did an autopsy to see what had happened. The pole passes by all of the internal organs. Nothing vital is damaged. So the only thing that kills you in the long run is the shock from the pain and infection. Like I said, this is not the kind of thing you want to be a party to, especially if you're the recipient. There are many bad ways to die, but I think impaling has got to be one of the worst. And with that pleasant note, we will pause for a few commercials. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Tired of drinking bad coffee? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, suite number 7. It's a great place to meet your friends, enjoy a cup of coffee or some hot tea, listen to the music, and hold a conversation. Unlike some coffee places where you can't hear yourself think, the Organic Man Coffee Shop has pleasant background music and pleasant conversation to go with it. Stop on by 1002 Iturbide, suite number 7. Plenty of parking on both sides of the street at this time.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanesa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanesa Radio.
You're listening to Arcanesa Radio. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that brief respite from the horrendous, terrible, nasty things we were discussing. I know this sounds a bit extreme, impaling a person on a wooden stake. Remember, this is back right in the middle of the Inquisition. People were constantly being rounded up, tortured, set to a stake, and set on fire. It wasn't unheard of for several people to be killed this way. So for Vlad Tepes to impale all of the enemy soldiers, it was a lot of people being killed all at once, but considering the time, it wasn't that extreme. Lots of people were killed in nasty, horrible ways, and this was just another example of it. If you can think of that term that we have in the Constitution, cruel and unusual punishment, this is kind of what it was referring to in the Eighth Amendment of our Constitution. In the United States, you cannot be impaled, you can't be chained to a stake and set on fire, things like that, simply because that was very common back in old Europe. May have been Vlad III, because this may have been the time that Vlad III became known as Vlad Tepes. Tepes means impaler. So Vlad Tepes means Vlad the Impaler. Now he has earned his new nickname. Back in this time, no one started a war in the wintertime. They had what was known as the war season. Started in spring, ran through summer, ended up in fall. If you hadn't conquered your enemy in the fall, you packed up your bags and you went home and you started planning for your next attack. No one fought in the wintertime. It's not like today where you could put on a warm coat, pitch your tent somewhere, call up some warm food for dinner. Back then, there was no warm place to go. So you just didn't start a war in the wintertime, unless your name was Vlad III. Winter of 1462, Vlad crossed the Danube River and devastated the entire Bulgarian landscape in the area around Serbia and the Black Sea. He disguised himself and his men as Turkish cavalry unit. He utilized the fluent Turkish that he had learned while he was in captivity. He would just simply ride into a Turkish camp. Back then, there was no actual standard uniform. You just kind of looked sort of like a soldier. And once they were inside the enemy's camp, then they would attack from the center and kill anyone that they didn't know. By using small military units, it was easier for them not to kill each other, and the Turks had no idea who the enemy was until it was too late. So there he was, Vlad the Impaler, running about in the middle of the winter, killing off the enemy as fast as he could track them down, and they had no idea where the enemy was. In a letter to Corvinus, dated the 2nd of February, Vlad III wrote, "I have killed peasants, men and women, old and young, who lived in Olbuksa and Novoselo, where the Danube flows into the sea. We killed 23,884 Turks, without counting those whom we burned in homes, or the Turks whose heads were cut off by our soldiers. Thus, your Highness, you must know that I have broken the peace." Pope Pius II had called for a crusade, and it looks like he got one. I would say definitely that Vlad III had broken the peace. He'd broken a lot of other things. I kind of wonder, well, who was the lowly royal that had to go around and count all those dead bodies? Because remember, the common soldiers, the serfs, the commoners, they couldn't read, write, or do arithmetic, so it had to be some second lieutenant was sent around to count the bodies. And do you think he really counted each and every one? Well, we'll never know. In response to Vlad invading Turkey, Turkish territory, which had been Christian territory up until 1453, Sultan Mehmed II raised an army of around 90,000 troops. And in the springtime, because he wasn't about to go to war in the wintertime, he marched on Wallachia. Army was under the Ottoman general Mahmud Pasha, and in its ranks was Radu, Vlad's younger brother. So now Radu is about to go to war with his own brother. Vlad was unable to stop the Ottomans from crossing the Danube on July 4th, 1462, when they entered Wallachia. So instead, he organized small attacks. He would ambush the Turks anytime he could, waiting for them to come to him and then attacking them from a strong position. And then they would fade away into the woods, kind of like what the soldiers did during the Revolutionary War here in the United States. This finally led to what is known throughout history as the night attack, when 15,000 Ottomans were killed. The story goes that before making his attack, Vlad had snuck into the Turkish camp disguised as a Turk once more. They hadn't caught on to his schemes yet. He wandered around the camp, speaking to sentries and anyone that cared to talk, until he was able to locate the Sultan's tent. Then he learned about any of the Sultan's directives, so he would know what the Turkish soldiers may and may not be doing when they attacked. Mahmed had ordered his soldiers not to exit their tents during the night time, so in case there was an attack, it wouldn't lead to confusion. All those Turkish soldiers not having a set, fast uniform, in the dark, it could lead to some hostilities amongst their own troops. So the man in charge had thought that it would be better just to stay in your tent and defend the ground you stood on. Knowing full well the Turks were ordered to stay in their tents, Vlad III had the upper hand, and he knew exactly how to proceed next. In the middle of the night, they came storming into the tents, into the camp, waving torches, blowing bugles, making a horrendous uproar. The Turks, of course, were half asleep at the time of the attack, had no idea what was coming. The Wallachian army was only about 7,000 to 10,000 horsemen, but they came riding in fast and loud in the middle of the night. Since the Turks were ordered to stay in their tents, well, the Wallachians would simply set fire to the tents as they went by. The skirmish lasted from 10 p.m., approximately, they didn't have watches yet, till about 4 o'clock the next morning. It was not one attack. They would attack, they'd slip out of camp, Then they'd attack again from another direction. They would pretty much just ride through an encampment, killing anyone that got in their way, and then ride out the other side. Well, the Turks, not knowing who to trust and who not to trust, stayed up till well after sunrise, killing each other, thinking that other Turkish soldiers might be the Wallachians. So the Turks actually helped the Wallachians in the battle. A lot of Turkish soldiers set on each other and, well, they killed each other. Vlad the Impaler's attack was celebrated by the Saxon cities of Transylvania. The Italian states, Pope, even the Pope thought it was a tremendous victory. Upon hearing of the night attack, Corvinus expressed great joy, probably knowing that he wasn't going to have to go to battle now. They thought that Vlad had pretty much saved all of Eastern Europe. Even Venice was spared from an attack of 300 ships that the Sultan had planned to send against them. So at this point in time, Vlad is now the hero of Europe. Vlad III asked the Hungarian king, Corvinus, for assistance. Hey, you got all that gold. Send me some soldiers. Send me some weapons. Vlad was not Catholic at this time. He had been raised in the Orthodox Church, which the Catholic Church's Pope was in Italy, and the Orthodox Church's Pope was in Constantinople. So at that time, Vlad was still Orthodox Church. If you look at pictures of Moscow, which is known as the city of churches, you see all those great big onion domes on top of the steeples. That's what the Orthodox Church had. It looked like kind of Turkish influence because of Constantinople. Well, Vlad had offered to change from the Orthodox Church to the Catholic Church simply as a means to get the King of Hungary to help him. But the King of Hungary was busy doing other things, didn't want to get involved in this nasty, horrible, icky thing called a war. So Vlad was forced to raise his own army. Vlad received no support from Corvinus, so he said to his people in Wallachia, "You are now my army." Anyone over the age of 12 years old is now in the military. Men, women, children. He even had gypsies in his military, which was considered not done at that time because nobody trusted the gypsies. But Vlad Tepes had gypsies in his army. You were kind of given a choice. You either join the army or we got this stake lined up for you. I'd join the army if I had to. Nobody wants to ride a stake. So now, here's Vlad with this small army, about 30,000 people, mostly old men, children, women, and he is setting out against an army of 90,000 Turkish soldiers. Your basic military back then, you did not receive military training. You were given a thing called a pike. It's a long wooden pole with this metal hook on the end of it that you could stab or you could smack somebody upside the head with it. And you were told to go at the enemy. You charged at the enemy, you hoped that you killed them before they could kill you. Most soldiers at that time were more afraid of their leaders than they were the people they were fighting. The common soldier, he didn't have anything against that guy on the other side of that field, but he was told to go kill him, and so kill him he did. The majority of the army consisted of peasants, shepherds, and a few boyars, a few of the rich aristocrats that were still hanging around town. They were easily identified because they were the only ones with real weapons. They were the ones in the chainmail armor. The serfs, the women, the children would receive something akin to a leather jacket with some padding in it. It was enough to stop a sword blow, but it wouldn't stop an arrow. Vlad had a personal bodyguard to keep the riffraff off of him just in case the army decided that they'd rather kill him than fight the enemy. His personal bodyguard consisted of a group of mercenaries, well paid from other countries. The Ottoman army managed to advance on Vlad Tepes, who, instead of attacking, decided to try a new tactic that he had figured out on his own. What he would do is he would retreat, and as he would go, he would burn everything edible, everything that the Turks could possibly use. So as Vlad's army is retreating and eating anything they could pick up, then they'd burn anything they couldn't carry. They poisoned wells, and they would reroute streams and rivers, causing huge swampy areas that the Turks couldn't pass through. A horse could not walk through a swamp, and so Vlad had his troops creating swamps everywhere they went. They consider this the scorched earth policy, and some armies still use it today. Traps were created by digging huge pits in the ground, putting sharpened spikes in the bottom of the pit, and then covering them with some thin boards and some leaves. Man on a horse comes riding along. Well, he's not going to cross that pit. He's liable to wind up in the bottom of it. Population and animals were evacuated to the mountains, and as Mahmed advanced for 7 days, his army could find nothing to scavenge for food, and they had no water to drink. Napoleon is credited with having said that an army marches on their stomach. See, at this time, you didn't have military rations. You didn't have a field kitchen coming along behind you cooking you a hot meal. You would come across the village or a farm, and you'd go and steal anything you thought you needed in the name of the king or the name of the prince. You'd simply take the food, take the water, take anything you wanted, and then leave with it. And the owner of the property had no recourse because it's for the good of the country. Napoleon was credited with having the invention of canned goods created so that his army would have something to eat while they were in the field. Made the army a little more mobile. But since Vlad was initiating the scorched earth policy, burning anything as they left, the Turkish army found themselves with no food, no water, no place safe to sleep at night. Now, Vlad is estimated to have killed around 80,000 people through various means. This includes some 20,000 people, Turkish prisoners, who were impaled and put on display outside of the city of Târgovişte. 20,000 people, mostly Turks, sitting there on their wooden poles, waiting to welcome the Turkish army as they rode towards the capital. These people are still alive, kind of in a lot of pain. This sight was so repulsive to the Sultan, Mahmed II, that after seeing this forest of wreathing semi-dead bodies, he turned around and left, took his army back to Constantinople. It did the trick. It kept the Turks out of the country, but, well, what a way to do it. Not a pleasant sight. Not a pleasant thought, I know. So, let's take this brief pause for station identification and a few pleasant-sounding commercials while you try to get that out of your mind. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Tired of drinking bad coffee? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7, for the best coffee in the country. Organic Man Coffee, only the best. You're not into coffee? They have hot tea. They have sweet drinks. You might even munch on a muffin. So stop on by. Plenty of parking at this new location, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanelza Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanelza Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Welcome back. Hope you're not having too many bad thoughts after that last little visual assault. Vlad's initial victory against the Ottoman was short-lived. He soon withdrew to Moldavia, leaving behind detachments of Wallachian soldiers. They would try sneak attacks against the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman invaders, but they were unable to keep them out of the country. The Ottoman administrator, Ali Bey, I'm not going to even try that first name, on behalf of the Sultan, gave Vlad's younger brother Radu his own battalions to lead, and the task of leading the Ottoman force into Wallachia. So now Vlad is being chased by his own brother. As the war raged on, Radu and his formidable battalions were well supplied with plenty of gunpowder and dinars. They had a supply train going all the way back into Turkey, whereas now that scorched earth policy was not going to be effective. Radu's forces finally besieged Paneri Castle, the famed lair of the Vlad III. This is the castle that you will almost always see when they refer to Castle Dracula. After his victory, Radu was given the title Bey of Wallachia by Mehmed II. Paneri Castle is the location where Vlad III's first wife chose to commit suicide upon hearing that her husband had been killed in battle. She jumped from the castle wall and smashed into the rocks below. Once again, due to the problems of record-keeping at this time, no one knows what her name was. She is simply referred to as the lady or Vlad III's wife. Strange thing about these two, they actually were in love. At this time, you didn't marry some woman because you loved her, because you wanted to live with her. You married her because it was a political gain for your side. Your country and another country were at war with each other, and the families would say, hey, let's get your son and my daughter to marry each other, and then we won't be at war anymore. And this is how marriages were arranged at that time. But Vlad and his wife were actually said to be very much in love, and that's why she had killed herself when she had heard that Vlad had been killed. He turned up later to discover that his wife had taken her own life. This actually made him quite sad at the time, which, like I said, at that time, a lot of royals didn't even know their spouses. Vlad III's defeat at Paneri was due in part to the fact that the boyars, the guys that were supposed to be fighting with him, had been alienated by Vlad's policy of undermining their authority. They had joined up with Radu, figuring at least, he was part of the royal family, and we don't necessarily need Vlad III. We'll go with Radu. And they didn't trust the Hungarian army to not stab them in the back more than they'd already been stabbed. By September 8th, Vlad had won another 3 victories, but continuous war had pretty much diminished his treasury, so he was no longer able to pay the mercenaries that were in his army. Autumn of 1462, Vlad and Matthias Corvinus, the current king of Hungary, spent 5 weeks negotiating an alliance and making plans for the upcoming battle. Believing that the king of Hungary was on his side, Vlad started making his way back to Wallachia, thinking that he now had the means to defeat the Turkish army. Unfortunately, Vlad was taken prisoner by members of Corvinus's own military. He was locked up in prison. Corvinus was claiming that Vlad was actually on the side of the Turks. Rumor has it that what had actually happened was that Corvinus had spent all that gold that the Pope had given him on personal doodads instead of using it to fight war with the Turks. And since he no longer had any money left to wage a battle against the Turks, he had to find some way of making the spotlight not shine so bright on him. So he's blaming Vlad III for all of his failings. Stephen the Great, Voivode of Moldavia and a relative of Vlad, his cousin, intervened on Vlad's behalf and managed to get him out of prison. There's no actual historical record of how long Vlad was in prison. The main reason that he was released from prison may have been the fact that the Turks had constantly been pushing farther north, and no one had the will or the ability to stop them. So I guess they figured, well, Vlad's done it in the past, let's let him do it again. 1466, Vlad married Ilona Silgaev, and they had 2 sons. So there are relatives alive today of Vlad Tepes. Their names are somewhat unpronounceable, but one of them was known as Vlad IV Dracula. Around 1475, Vlad and Stefan Báthory of Transylvania began preparations for the reconquest of Wallachia. By this time, Radu had died of unknown causes. The name Báthory has a history all of its own. In 1560, Elizabeth Báthory was the woman who bathed in blood to keep from growing old. She died as a prisoner in her own castle at age 54. At least 640 deaths were attributed to her skincare program. But that was 100 years down the road. When Vlad's army arrived, Prince Basarab and his army fled. Didn't even attempt to stop him. I guess they saw the look in his eyes and decided this battle is already lost. They simply packed up and ran. So once Vlad was back on the throne for the 3rd time, Stefan Báthory took his army and left, leaving Vlad in a very weak position. He had no money. He barely had an army. Most of his country had been pretty much beat to death by the Turks and by himself. There are several stories about how Vlad finally succumbed. Some sources say he was killed while fighting the Turks, surrounded in a pile of dead bodies. Others say he was killed by disloyal Wallachian boyars who stabbed him in the back, which was so common at that time that it's possible that that could have been what led to his death. One story says he died in a hunting trip, out chasing a deer, rode too fast, fell off his horse, and died from injuries. Still other reports claim that Vlad was accidentally killed by one of his own troops, kind of like Stonewall Jackson. Then there's the theory that Vlad III, Dracula, never actually died. That he's still skulking about in the dark hillsides as a vampire, sucking blood out of people, but that's just a rumor. The exact location of his death is unknown. No one knows for sure where, when, or how he was killed. His head was supposedly removed as a way to show the people that they had killed Vlad III. They preserved it in honey and took it back to Constantinople, where it was put on display, where anyone that wished to gaze upon his bodiless head could see it. His body was said to have been buried under the floor of a church on Snagov Island. An archaeological team went there recently, and they attempted to excavate the site, but due to the age of the deceased and the way of preserving at that time, when they opened up the burial pit, all they found was a pile of ashes. The body had simply dissolved when the air hit it. Now, Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, when it was unleashed on the planet, 1890, it was practically an overnight success. Now, Bram Stoker admits readily at the time that he had based his character of Dracula on Prince Vlad Tepes. He had read the historical accounts, and he thought this guy would make a heck of a villain in a story. If you've ever seen the movie, the German movie about the vampire, it was based on the book Dracula. Unfortunately, when they made the movie, they hadn't gotten copyright permission from Bram Stoker's wife. So she did everything in her power to see to it that that movie disappeared. Nosferatu. She took them to court, sued them, won, and part of the court ruling was that they had to destroy every copy of the movie ever made. Well, they did most of their part. However, one or two copies did manage to sneak by. So if you ever get a chance to watch Nosferatu, you'll quickly realize that it was simply Dracula made with a much nastier-looking actor. Bela Lugosi took the part of Dracula and turned him into almost an icon. Today, people think that's what a vampire is supposed to look like. Evening coat, red satin cloak, very well-mannered. In Romania, the Strigoi, which is a vampire, it's simply a reanimated corpse that goes around sucking blood out of people. Does not look nice, does not talk nice. It's simply more like a zombie than anything else, and it sneaks up on people at night only because if you saw this thing coming in the daytime, you'd run and hide. That idea that vampires can't come out in the sunlight was simply a creation by the people making the movie in Germany. They got to the end of the movie and realized that they didn't have an ending yet. What are we going to do? We don't have an ending. So one of the people running the camera crew said, hey, why don't we have sunlight come through the window and the vampire will burst into flames and disappear, and that's how we'll make the ending. So the movie Nosferatu is the reason why today people think vampires cannot go out in sunlight. Oh, and that thing about driving a stake through their heart, that doesn't kill a vampire either. You drive a stake through a vampire's heart to hold them still so you can get a sharp knife and cut their head off. So now you know more about vampires than you wish to know. You know all about Vlad Tepes and his rule of terror in Europe. Today he is hailed as a hero. He kept the Turks out of Romania for as long as he could. He held the country together when no one else could. So if you go to Romania today, you'll see statues, you'll see busts, you'll see all kinds of accolades showing that Vlad Tepes is a hero in Romania. Hope you enjoyed tonight's tale of history. Next week, tune in. We'll be talking about cannibals on July 2nd. So come on back and listen up.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder 3? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.